Hey everybody, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Ted, taking over for Dave and his computer issues today. With me, we have a special guest, an author. Want to introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anton Strout. I write the Dead to Me series with the Simon Canderous books, Paranormal Detective series, which I always call my Dresden Files Light series, and Jim Butcher wants to punch me in the neck meat whenever I say that, but it seems to work well for me. And then I would call it my modern day dungeon crawl series, which is gargoyles set in Manhattan and kind of kick-ass girl female paladin-y type characters and spellcasters, which is the Spellmason Chronicles, which I don't have book 1 here. I'm a horrible author. I would promote it, so you're seeing the cover of book 2 here, but I also host the Once and Future podcast, which is basically nerds talking to other creative types, basically the conversations I had in bars with a lot of these people, which originated for me. Probably the idea came at Gencon, because that's where I usually do most of my drinking and hang out with other authors.
Everybody, the webpage, the link to his podcast, as is on, that's there and ready to go.
Cool.
So let's get into your series and talk about them a little bit. You know, give the people a little bit of the sizzle. Those who are familiar with Nerdarchy know that we are, very big Harry Dresden fans or Jim Butcher fans. So your Spellmasons, you said, is a Dresden Light.
Well, the Simon Canderous books, it starts with Dead to Me. I would call it. I hadn't read Jim Butcher at the time I was writing it, but we share a publisher. We're both with Ace and Rock, but when I met Jim a couple years ago, I realized that I had taken a lot of elements from him without having read his books, and I panicked that I had somehow just ripped off his series. I'm like, it's a paranormal detective. It's set in Manhattan. His is Chicago. And I went to a convention. I was like, Jim, listen, my book starts out with a paranormal detective going into his office, and everyone there, they don't have time to train anybody. So they hand out kind of these wacky pamphlets and stuff to train people in this underfunded government agency in New York City that chases the paranormal. And at the beginning of the first Dresden Files thing, he walks into his office, and next to the door is a rack of wacky pamphlets on dealing with the paranormal and stuff. I'm like, Jim, I swear I hadn't even read you when I wrote this, and Ace, the same publisher, approved it. I'm like, and he's like, relax, like there's going to be connective tissue out there. And then we were cool up until maybe a year or so ago when he became my editor on Shadowed Souls, which has a Dresden Files story in it, but it's co-edited by him and Carrie Hughes, and it's all different paranormal detective stories. And I did a Simon Canderous prequel story in there, and Jim was my editor on it. And he was very helpful and very kind, but don't think that I wasn't like crapping myself that the king of the urban fantasy genre was the one who was editing me. But he seemed to like my story resolves itself without necessarily punching things, as a lot of stuff does. So that made it a little bit more unique in the collection, I think. But I always kind of missed Ghostbusters, and I kind of missed kind of a Joss Whedon, Buffy the Vampire Slayer sensibility.
Okay.
So, that's kind of why, and I'm from, I've mostly been in Manhattan for about 20 years, and just weird crap happens here. It's a weird city, and I could imagine the paranormal around every turn here. The other series, the Spellmason Chronicles, I call it
before we get into that one.
Mm-hmm.
First off, I got to say I'm super jealous. Jim Butcher is one of those people that's on my to-do list. I want to meet him, want to talk to him. Say how much I love his stuff. I'm looking forward to checking out yours as well, since there's a lot of corollary there. Because a similar themed thing, it's got to be great.
I think so, but I'm a little partial.
All right, so then the one that's with gargoyles, is that in any way, shape, or form like the animated show Gargoyles?
It's not unlike Gargoyles. To keep the Disney lawyers at bay, I swear I'm not ripping off gargoyles per se, but I will say I've watched a lot of gargoyles growing up. And I had done a short story for an anthology years ago that was a one-shot, 20-page thing about this female artist who kind of met a gargoyle who'd watched over her family for centuries in Manhattan. And it was just a little moment the day they meet. And
Right.
then I realized in researching and writing the story, oh crap, there's a lot that happens before the story and a lot that happens after. I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be a book. Oh crap, this is going to be a series now. There was just, you spend so much time as a writer trying to figure out your entry point into, especially in short stories, your entry point into the story. And you kind of have to think of what came before and what came after. And sometimes you can just write that short story and leave it alone. In this particular case, it just grew and I ran with it. And then, there's a guy who owns a game shop in it called Roll for Initiative. And he becomes kind of the Samwise Gamgee character.
Yeah.
Who he plays D&D. He carries rope with him around New York City because you always need rope and stuff like that. And he takes a real Dungeons and Dragons approach to dealing with the weird paranormal things that are surrounding him in the series, which he's probably the most me-like character of the bunch, as it were.
Do you carry rope with you through New York?
No. Look, no. I wish. But he's well equipped. Like I did a whole thing where I wrote a whole list of all the things he probably does carry on him in his bag, like totally what I would do if I were that level of critical nerd and these things actually existed.
All right. Yeah.
But I'm not over the fringe enough to have actually, gone ahead and purchased all this stuff.
Well, that's that's actually really cool that you can get in there and get into the headspace of this. Is he like a secondary character? Would you call him a main character?
Well, this particular series is written from two perspectives. One is the 24-year-old female artist whose family has a legacy of these gargoyles watching over them. And the other perspective is also first person, which is a centuries-old gargoyle, the one gargoyle who watches over them. So you're getting these two different perspectives. And he's kind of a support character. This guy, Marshall Blackmore, he's kind of a support character to Alexandra, who's the main girl in it. So there's probably like a trinity kind of going on there, a little, Ron, Hermione, support team to the Harry Potter of my main character, as it were.
So do you prefer to write only in the modern setting?
It's the place that's easiest and most comfortable because it's real easy to write in a very modern sensibility. I've always been quicker with dialogue and action than I am at detail and the plotting. That's what comes to me more naturally first, because I think I tend to go more cinematically. Ghostbusters comes to mind always in my brain. It's always got quippy, quick dialogue, and so it's easier to write that. I don't have to monitor it as much. When I write something more traditional, and I've done more short story work in like traditional fantasy and stuff like that, then I have to rein that in. I have to find ways to be quippy and not make it sound like the movie Clueless at the same time, Right. And it's a different trick to pull off, and I like it when I have an idea that fits with it. But generally speaking, my comfort zone is more modern sensibility. Although, I've got several projects going right now that totally defy everything I just said there. So,
well, I look at things, and when it comes to, I'm not an author. I don't think I'll ever have the capabilities of publishing a novel. That's just not one of my strong suits. But we talked off camera that you are a gamer, and we'll get into the love of that. But when you're DMing, when you're preparing material, you're still writing. You're still putting things out there for a story. You're still creating characters that have, life to them. And I've found that when I'm trying to write in a modern setting, I find that there's definite challenges where it's like, well, what level of detail do you need to get into? Do you want to actually pull out a map of the given town or city and actually cite different streets? Or are you looking to just like, well, I'm going to completely wing it, and I don't care if, Main Street in this town is supposed to be broad. I'm just going to gloss over that detail because it's not important to my story. So what kind of level do you look at when you're doing these, when you're planning these stories within a modern world where we can actually go and look at said places?
I tend to, first of all, I think being a published writer for 10 years has ruined me for dungeon mastering, because I don't like other people coming into my world and messing with it. I can do it, and I have run games since being published author, but I discover that I call the shots. I say where these characters are going and what they're doing in my books. And DMing has been kind of ruined a little bit for me because it's other people messing with my stuff. Now, that said, I tend to do what I would call very tight focus camera, especially in your series, because you got to leave yourself room to grow. And so I might know a certain amount of detail, but I'm not putting it down there on the page because I need room to wiggle out of this or move here and there. I want to give you as much as you need to know in those scenes and feel the sense of the world, but you fill in the gaps as a reader.
Okay.
Like, I don't need to describe New York City to you. I need to mention to you in passing as the characters are talking that you want to skip the 33rd floor at the Empire State Building because there's this whole zombie temp typing pool, and if you accidentally go in there, you're probably going to die. Like, just what makes the world different, these little details there. But I'm not going to do like like I see so many beginning writers, they want to tell you all about their amazing world. And I think in D&D that happens a lot of time too. You get the DM occasionally who's so over descriptive of everything, and some people love that level of detail. I call it Tom Clancy syndrome. Like, you pick up a Tom Clancy book, like the Hunt for October, you know how to functionally operate a submarine by really the end of that, because he's put in the technical manual, and people love that detail. I don't write like that, and I love that the stuff I need to know, I need to know. But I find that the more detailed I get, the harder it is to write a series of books, because you got so much detail going in there that you could easily write stuff that contradicts it 2 or 3 books out. And so I try to be the camera's tight. You're just seeing these characters in their situations. And over time in a series, the camera kind of pulls back and you get more detail over time. I'm also the type of writer who I almost leave out all the detail first time around. It's all chess pieces on the board, dialogue, little character quirks, stuff like that. And then I'm like, I should probably describe what these people look like and where they are. That comes last to me. That's the thing that I fight in myself. It's stuff that it interests me, but it interests me less. It's more about the dynamics of people and characters and how they get through their problems or how they change through them. And then all details come later. And it's helped me when I have had to DM. It's been both a blessing and a curse, because it's great to know I can build a world and do all this crazy stuff here. And then when people come in and throw stuff at me, I can think of enough to get by if they suddenly go off the ranch, as it were, from my storyline, that I'm trying to railroad them a little bit down gaming wise. So I've taken to playing more than actually running more, because that makes me happy. I don't have to steer the ship.
Nice. So I understand the whole thing about, details. Giving too many details too early can mess things up. I've never had the chance to talk to totally blanking, but the Harry Potter author, she says in the first book that, his parents were both head boy and head girl, but then you learn, in book 3 that his father was actually, pretty much the jokester, closer to Fred and George. And it's like, well, how does he then become head boy? He's not Percy, he's closer to Fred. That doesn't make sense. So like, they never fully go and explain that. So it's like, well, maybe it still happened and there were details that we don't have. But to me, it seems like there was a change in between books 1 and book 3 as to who James Potter really was.
Well, there's the story stuff you know, and the story stuff you think you know when you're writing a series.
Right.
Like for instance, in my first series, I have the partner of the main paranormal detective, the older seasoned veteran, the older agent in Men in Black, as it were, to Will Smith's character.
Okay.
Who is he's been around for a while, but years ago he lost his brothers. All I really knew was he lost his brother, and that's his brother disappeared mysteriously at the beach one day, just out of nowhere. And I just knew he'd lost his brother. That's all I really knew. And then in book 3, something came up where I was like, this would be a good place to reintroduce that brother thread. And then
nice.
I had to concoct the story as far as, well, what happened and how did he get to where we think the brother is now and all this stuff. And I could make it work because I knew vaguely that the brother was missing, with a big question mark as to the how and why of it. Now, the good thing about writing a series is that, while you're editing book 1 with your editor and getting ready to go to publication, you're frantically writing book 2 and planning out book 3. So as you're putting details into book 2 or 3, you can be like, I need this to really happen in book 2. But that doesn't exist at all. So you frantically go back to book 1 and you're like, put in the stuff that supports book 2 or the idea you have for book 3. And so there's a little wiggle room as far as what you can and can't fit in.
Right.
And J.K. Rowling, I'll forgive her because, she did more for reading than most books will ever do and got people into bookstores and all that. But it is those weird little disconnects sometimes. Like, hey, I thought you said this person was this, and now they're this. That's weird. I totally get that from the perspective now.
All right. So we always have our awesome fans, shouting out questions in the chat. So if you guys are out there and you're, a fan of Anton and you want to put questions in the live chat, we do respond to them. Just put question in front of it. So Geekin' Undies has a question. In your headspace, while writing your characters, do you imagine your gargoyle guardian sounding like the esteemed Keith David?
There's something that happens to my voice in my own head, and as I'm typing out in the gargoyle's perspective, his language is a lot more stilted. He doesn't have like my main female character of that series. She's very modern. She's got a 24-year-old sensibility of dialogue and inner city talk and what have you. And then I switch to him, and I get this very stilted Shakespearean sound to him, and nothing is ever quippy, or he doesn't get idiomatic language. So they'll say some kind of phrase, like even a stitch in time saves 9 or something stupid like that. And he'll be like, won't get it at all. So he doesn't understand idioms or anything really about modern sayings and such. And so I do hear kind of the Keith David-y kind of very for some reason, it also becomes kind of Worf in my head a little bit because I always like the deep bass tone of Worf from Star Trek Next Generation.
Nice. So do you ever, this is from Kyle Ellis, do you ever come up with a scene for a later book in a series and find you end up excluding it since it doesn't end up fitting, or do you make it fit like the Harry Potter epilogue?
A lot of times I rate them when I call scenes that I love because they're cool. They showed me something about the character. And then my editor will come back to me and be like, you could take this entire chapter out because why is it here? I'm like, well, because it's cool. It says something about, I have a scene in first book where my character Simon, he takes a day off from his paranormal investigation day job, and he has a power of psychometry. He can touch an object and read the history. And the main means he supports himself in this underpaying paranormal job is he will find objects, touch them, read the history of it, and return them to their owners, and their owners usually give him money. So he finds this Intellivision game system with all the cartridges, which is a story from my own past where my dad gave all my games away, and I was destroyed as a child. And he brings them to this guy who works in a bookstore, in White Plains shopping mall. It was a Walden Books back then. Returns the games and the console to the guy there, and it's this beautiful tear-jerking scene based partly on my life. Tells you something about Simon and how he both cares for people and also is a little greedy for the money. Tells you a lot about the character. Does nothing to move forward the plot of the book. And so I'm like, this is awesome scene there. And I'm like, and I love it. I'm like, but it has no place here. So I really try to avoid anything that forces anything to happen in later books or derails the thread of the story. And I've gotten better 7 books into these things, but every so often my editor will correct me.
Now, if that's already written, like that could be like it's a short story you insert into another piece.
That's usually what happens, because there's a whole thread in the premise of the series that there's the secret organization has existed for years in New York City and in the United States. And one of the founding fathers of it was Ben Franklin, who turns out to be a necromancer. And I'd written this other short, and I wrote this short story called The 14th Virtue, which Franklin had written the 13 Virtues, which were all these great aesthetic ideas for existing and living and surviving. And I made them all just by tweaking them ever so slightly into stuff that was really be about like necromancy and long life and in his service to the country. So around the time I published a short story of Ben Franklin Necromancer, Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter comes out. And I'm like, and I wanted to make a novel of Ben Franklin Necromancer. I'm like, well, I can't do that now. I just look like I'm hopping on the Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And I don't begrudge Seth Grahame-Smith anything for the success of that and what's happened with his writing career out there. But it pains me a little, but it was a cutting room floor thing from the books that I knew this as a fact that Ben Franklin had been a founder of this thing. And I had written a short pastiche of what it would be like, and that became the short story. So a lot of the cutting room floor things do eventually make its way into someone's anthology out there. Yeah.
Nice. So TrueMate says, have you ever been in a scenario where you start making a character and then you're like, wait a second, hang on, this is pretty much X from series Y?
Well, not only that, but I think sometimes friendships also, the connective tissue that you become friends with people kind of carries through, and you sometimes end up creating the same thing. For instance, about a year or so ago, I finally got into a regular Monday night game of D&D because I hadn't played in a long time because of writing schedule and stuff. But my other friends have committed. They play through Fantasy Grounds every Monday night for about a year and a half now. So I created this character, nice. Rogue, arcane trickster type of character. He's a juggler. You know, he likes to swing from chandeliers type of guy, and all my friends in the game are like, do you watch Penny Arcade? I'm like, oh, my friend Pat Rothfuss, I think, does stuff with Penny Arcade. And they're like, yeah, you should watch that. So I go and I watch the Penny Arcade stuff, which is the guys from Penny Arcade playing Dungeons and Dragons together. And my friend Pat Rothfuss is on there, and he plays his character named Viari, who is a chandelier swinging rogue, very much just like mine. So I just put in like, well, since Pat and I are friends, I'm just going to call them cousins. And it's just because Pat and I get along and geek out in a certain way. And it's not surprising to me that we would create kind of similar things out there. But I always feel like most of my story ideas come from, I like someone's take on this character, but that's not the way I would do it. Like, there's always going to be my version of, yeah, but how would I react to this? I wouldn't do it. Even if you gave us all the same, if you sat 12 writers down and put us all down with the same exact plot, you would never get the same book out of 12 authors there. They'd all be variations on a theme probably out there. So a lot of authors obsess over it, and like they get so busy trying to write the most super unique thing that they can that they end up writing some hero no one knows about, cares for or feels any connection to. So I just figure I'm probably ripping someone off in the first place, but what's my take on it? Because there's no new ideas under the sun. So I don't sweat it too much.
That's the direction I would go. It's like, it doesn't matter what you come up with all of the ideas and all the things that are out there. The chances that you've got something that's so unique, it's pretty crazy. Melanie Metters wants to know, if you could write for any franchise in any format or media, what would it be? What is your dream franchise?
Well, there's the one that eludes me currently. Many of my friends who I've had on the podcast and who I've been at many conventions with, a lot of them lately have been writing for Star Wars. My friend Delilah Dawson just did the Phasma book, and now she's going to be writing a Pickle Rick comic for Oni Press, which I'm super jealous of as well. But Chuck Wendig also did the Aftermath series of books, bridging from Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens. 40 people are in that contribution. It's like 40 years of writing different smaller character short stories. I have 40 other friends who are all in that one, and I'm like, oh, and I know the editor of this, and I'm like, we really need to talk, Jennifer, if you're listening. We need to talk. It has eluded me. I haven't really pursued it. I've got several other things on my plate right now that I want to get down, but Star Wars has eluded me. But I'll get in there. Make no mistake about it. You know,
that's the one thing that I actually find. I mean, not as an author, but as a gamer, the ability to actually enter into franchised worlds isn't actually all that difficult, because you can literally take any of these, themeless droppings like Fate, Mutants and Masterminds, Open Legend, Cipher System, and you could drop them into any scape, and just say, all right, well, I'm going to now play in this world. I'm going to do this story. I know you said you don't run anymore because it ruins your authorship. You want it to all be your world, your decisions. Right. But to me, it's like, all right, I want to tell a story in Star Wars. Well, my Star Wars books are 3 feet from my computer here that I can run from, and if I want to do something in Harry Potter, well, I can pick things, and we can go play in that world, and I don't have to worry about creating the whole thing, because tabletop role-playing games is a communal writing, and we all get to enjoy and be a part of the story. So like that's my answer to any of those things, is I can go down that road. I'm gonna run, then it's like, well, then it's not your story, because you're only, as a player, you only get to be that small slice of the pie.
Exactly. I mean, I have two buckets of stuff that I'm playing other people's sandboxes with right now, which I'm under non-disclosure agreement, so I can't tell anyone what they are until they talk about them. But I'm super excited to be doing those. I would also love to do Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms is my jam. I started in Greyhawk, but Forgotten Realms, I'm friends with Ed Greenwood, who, had you told 10-year-old me that I'd become friends with Elminster the Sage, I would have crapped myself. But he's a writer symposium guy from Gencon, and he's super nice. And I follow a lot of the old school D&D people, so Forgotten Realms really became my jam. And I would love to write something in there, and I've got a lot of friends working in there. But I also, I have my own ideas for my own worlds, and I'm like, so that's like a bucket list thing. Like, should I get the time in my writing schedule? Sure, I'll go do a Forgotten Realms novel or whatever, if they let me. It'd be great if they used to do those Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn, was a whole anthology series, and I think that was Forgotten Realms based. And I think it was Raymond Feist was the co-editor on it. And I would love to, if they did a good anthology series like that, I would absolutely make a case to at least get in, because I wouldn't have to dedicate a year. I could dedicate a month or two to writing a short story for it and get to play in their sandbox, which would be the perfect storm of things for me. Really
nice. I've sadly I've been turned away from the Forgotten Realms novels. I toted the Forgotten Realms novels for a long time. I've read most of the Ari Salvatore Drizzt novels, Dark Elf, however you want to pronounce his name.
Yeah.
I refuse to change. But Salvatore was actually tasked with taking Forgotten Realms from third edition to fourth edition, and they wanted to make all these grand sweeping changes. Now, I don't know how much power Salvatore had in there, but I felt it was a step backwards in his typical writing style. Given what I know about that particular series, Wolfgar was supposed to be the main character, and everybody fell in love with the Dark Elf, so he kind of fell to the back seat, and he tried doing all these changes, but throughout whatever the name of that book series is that brought, Forgotten Realms, Faerun, from one edition to the next, over one novel, he took the world 100 years into the future. And at one point in time, in a single paragraph, he says, and these characters adventured for 40 years. And knowing what all the other characters that had existed in that series together, it could not have possibly been 40 years. Mm-hmm. So the Companions of the Hall, these grand heroes that are known throughout Faerun, have this legendary thing. Now, spoiler alerts, guys, half of them are dead, but in that grand sweeping, gesture, these 4 characters' adventure, he actually kills Wolfgar in the passage of time, because he can't live. He's base human. He's not going to live another 40 years based on what he is, especially living in, the frozen north of Icewind Dale. Utterly killed me. And, I kept reading for a little while longer, another book or two afterwards, but he lost me there. I would still love to talk to him, still love to, to get into those nitty-gritty questions, because there's lots of stuff that he's written that I've liked, but that killed me.
I've had Bob on the Once a Future podcast, and he's delightful. But he and Kevin Anderson kind of get the same gruff from people. Like, they're writing pop bubblegum things set in fantasy world, and they get a lot of crap for being like somehow like they're just a machine that's churning stuff out, what have you. It's interesting because I've gone to Gencon since 98 or 99 or so, which was when 3rd edition first launched and the D&D movie came out. Now, you can say what you want about D&D movie. That could be a whole hour to 2 hours discussion, I'm sure.
We're gonna just slide that to the side and continue.
Exactly. But growing up, I remember going from 1st edition to 2nd edition and watching TSR at the time put out, the left-handed thieves toolbook, or, the right-handed magic user who only uses wands in his offhand handbook, where it's a hard thing. Like, look, if you buy 3 books, you can play the game. If you buy 1 book, 2 books, really, you could play the game. And that's one-time investment. How do you sustain a business around that?
Yep.
Like, you put out new materials, and the quality of materials for a while, as they were struggling, really became kind of like iffy. Some of it was great and some of it was just rushed out. And I think when there were a lot of grand changes from 3rd to 3.5 was fixing all the things once you put thousands and thousands of players into playing 3rd edition. Because I sat all the Stump the Designers things at Gencon, where Skip Williams and Monty Cook and Jonathan Tweet were up there, and people were like, explain a text of opportunity to us. And they would spend a while talking it out with like all the people who were the super fanboys, and then you get the erratas, the corrections in 3.5, and then the jump to 4th edition becomes like, we're going to make it more like a MMO RPG. Like, you're just going to have your tanks and all the stuff. And I read the rule set for 4, and I never played 4 because it just lost all interest for me. And then 5th edition felt like a course correction back to storytelling and fast gameplay, but going back to the inherent rule system for me, which made it what I wanted in the first place. So, like, as just the game mechanic alone, so the fact that the novels, that first of all, that we've ever gotten as many novels as we've had in any of the worlds is amazing. Absolutely. Does it surprise me that the quality or direction of certain things is a little like, well, we had an agenda with 4th edition, and therefore we're going to go forward with it, and therefore some stuff might suffer. I absolutely see why it could and did, as it were.
Well, I fully feel that as many people have said that, fourth edition was designed to be like the video game, and I really expected them to have a great success with fourth, and then to take the exact same mechanics and dump it into some kind of video platform. But since it didn't take off the way they expected it to, they clearly didn't do the work to get it, into a digital setup. But that's what I saw pretty much from the moment one of reading it. So
I've seen so many panels over the past 20 years of people trying to do different digital things for Dungeons and Dragons. Fantasy Grounds does a pretty good job of incorporating the rule sets and keeping that somewhat modern. It's got its problems, it's got its foibles, but when you consider all the things you could think of as a player that you want to do, and that they've built a mechanic to make that happen at all in a game, I'm like, what are you expecting, people? The world? I've watched people struggle for 20 years. Companies come and go as they're like, we want to do this. Oh, we can't do that. The technology's not there. We can't figure out the math on it. And then they finally, I feel like, have tightened the rule sets enough that they make sense. The third edition rules work in Fantasy Grounds. I have no idea about fourth edition, but we're using fifth edition right now. And I got to say, for the most part, for everything I want to do as an arcane trickster rogue in that, I'm like, you guys are killing it. It's not always intuitive, but that's what my DM's for. He's the one running the grand suite of the software. And it
absolutely
only crashes occasionally for me.
So one of the things we do here is we do a roll call. So guys in the chat sound off. We like to have the people in the chat list where they're listening in or watching in from, and as it ticks down, we wind up reading it off, and it's a way to really say how far we're reaching. Now we don't have as many at this moment as we sometimes do. But it's always cool to just, see, because usually we've got a pretty broad worldly reach.
Well, nobody wants to hear nobody wants to hear authors talk about D&D. That's what it is. I'm killing it right now.
All right, so we have Kyle Ellis in Kelowna, Geek and Undies in Ohio, Evil Silly Putty in Minnesota, Trumate in Wales, UK, Raven in the OZ, Todd in Dallas, Texas, Shivs the Stabba in Oklahoma, Lincoln in Sweden, Levi in Seattle, Washington, Nathan in Nashville, Tennessee, Satori Shin in Sacramento, California, Regilio in Utah, Ben in Canada, New Brunswick, Canada, Joseph in France, Spoomer 100 in Bavaria. We got Walt in Kentucky. We got Christopher in Romania. We got Gonzo the Great in Florida. Anil in Indiana. So we usually have a pretty diverse crowd.
There's a wide swath indeed. We're international there.
We are always international. We usually have UK and Sweden covered. There's always Canada, and of course the local USA people are always here as well. But
I've heard that Canadians love me. I love going to, say, Montreal, driving up and eating all the poutine and cheese curd I can stuff in my face. But I've heard from our Penguin Canada reps up there. They're like, "Oh yeah, sure, it's just really well up here." I'm like, why has Canada not invited me to come be there with them? But I'll be okay though. I'll work some my Canada issues.
All right, so total thought jumped into my mind, and I gotta go down this rabbit hole to see
Go
what happens. So you have connections with Jim Butcher, and obviously there is a vast difference in the worlds that Harry Dresden and Simon live in. Is there any chance of any kind of crossover between those characters?
Yeah. First of all, I would love that, and I would benefit the most from it, clearly, because when Jim's books come out, they automatically hit number 1 or number 2. And honestly, I can call myself a USA Today bestseller because his Shadowed Souls anthology that I'm in made it onto the USA Today bestseller list. Now, that's a little coattail riding of me because his name is the one in big block letters on the cover. That said, I was in that and he edited me and I was chosen for that. So I feel legitimate in calling myself that. There has been a reference or two that my character at least has heard of the Chicago Wizard.
Okay.
In there. I like to feel like it's all a big sandbox. Like I could totally picture my character has met Toby Day from the Sean and McGuire series, the October Day novels, which is also a big paranormal fantasy series. And Shannon, who's a cartoonist, has drawn cartoons of our characters actually meeting and interacting and stuff. So like, and I have it that my own series, my characters walk past the other characters in this bar at this series. So there's connective tissue to this bar called Eccentric Circles, where weird paranormal people hang out in New York City and stuff. I would be happy if Harry Dresden and Simon ever met. Again, I'm the only one who I think really benefits from that. If anything, it probably would, it would probably plummet Jim's sales or something. Really.
Well, I don't think it would plummet his sales. I think it's interesting to have crossovers every once in a while, and while the current stuff that's going on in the Dresden verse, he's kind of stepped away from the paranormal investigation angle of his particular character. A short story that goes into like his past, I think could be something that would be a lot of fun.
There's also no question that Harry Dresden was totally kick Simon's ass. There's not even a question out there. And I think it's because Harry's just seen a lot more crap over the years. I mean, when I was talking I had Jim on the show a while back, and we were talking, and he's on like book 23 of the 25 he had planned or so.
No, he's writing book 6. He's writing book 16 of 20, I believe.
Yeah,
or at least my interpretation of what information he leaked out is when he was in college or whatever, he wrote the outline of the Dresden Files as just a quick, I put this together in like a half hour, an hour. And he says it's supposed to be, 20 books finishing with an epic trilogy. Now, I interpret that means the whole thing is 20 books, or it's 20 books and then, a trilogy. So I was looking at it, it's supposed to be 20, and we're waiting for book 16, which I've been, gurring at, for a while now.
Yeah, well, don't be that guy, though, because I'm part of the Jim Butcher Appreciation Society on Facebook, and it's almost like a drinking game of who's the angry asshole who's going to come in and say, hey, where's my book? And Jim has put up that spoof counter that basically is like, is the new book ready yet? And it's like, it's coming out in blank days. And it's literally just a click counter so that every time you ask, another day gets added. And it's like, it's coming out in 2,364,000 days or something like that. Look, I'm friends with George R.R. Martin, Pat Rothfuss, and Jim Butcher. I get it. And I have a day job where it would be great for me to say Jim Butcher's next book is on the schedule, because it would mean a lot of money for my day job with Penguin Random House. We want it. Everyone wants it.
I only say Gurr. Like, I've got absolutely nothing against the man. He's got his own life. He's got his own schedule, and I have loved literally everything that he's put his name on, and I eagerly look forward to the next one. And it's merely just a Gurr.
Yeah, no,
because I want to get there.
Mine is a message to all, not directly towards you. It's just I watch my friends suffer, and I get. Fandom is such a weird thing at times. It's like you love something so much that sometimes you're a total jerk about how much you love it. And there's such entitlement at times. And I agree. An author should put out a book in a timely manner. Absolutely for that. But I also I know how much it takes me to not write. It's real easy to not write. It's real easy to do a billion other things. more so with the weight of hundreds of thousands of people waiting, and thousands of them every time they see you are just like, when are we getting the next one? When are we getting the next one? I've never, and the thing is, it's never happened directly at me. Although people ask me when the next Simon book's coming and whatever, and I'm like, well, when they pay me to, I'll put out the next Simon book, or I'll kickstart it because enough people have asked for it at this point. But I've been with Pat or Jim walking across the convention floor, and I watch them get stopped every foot to be asked the same question about it. And it's like, it's almost like you hit a critical point where that's all you're known for, is the guy who's not writing the book. And that makes you almost want to write less. So it's a real catch-22 situation. And like, the only answer is to sit down and write it. But it almost makes it impossible at that level of functionality of like, wow, you're a bestseller, and the only thing people want from you is like, feed me my pill now. Why aren't you feeding me my pill that I want right now? I love you, but I'm going to be a dick towards you because I want my thing now.
So then my next question to you shouldn't be, when is the next book coming out for you?
No, it shouldn't.
So that's actually really wise advice. So if you guys, out there, if you are, seriously into novels, take this as a sign from Anton that asking the author when the book comes out actually only delays the book. So don't do it.
Well, I mean, look, honestly, I think it really depends how you ask too. I mean, I've seen people who are just super sweet, but even the nice people, again, it's something, first of all, you could Google. The second anyone knows the date, it will be everywhere.
It's out there. Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly. It'll be on Amazon. It'll be, and like right now, I think there's probably like a placeholder date for Jim Butcher for the year 2050 or something, if there is one for the next one. And you could probably like, that's probably not a real date. But like a question you could ask Google instead of the author would be, especially when it's like, when am I getting my next fix? Is better Google it. Damn it, leave the author alone.
All right, somebody Google that exact sentence. When do I get my next fix?
Uh-huh.
All right, so let's wrap this back into your novels. You've got the Paranormal Investigator. How many books is that currently? And where do you have a set idea for when that's going to?
Well, the Dead to Me books were my first series. Dead to Me, Deader Still, Dead Matter, and Dead Waters. There's a theme there, if you can spot it. And I sold book one thinking there might be a book two. And when you sell book one to a publishing house, they're like, great, when can we have the second one? Because you're a fantasy writer, therefore you write series. I'm like, I do? I'm like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. So you contract for 2 books, and then you contract for 2 more as time goes on. So I have my short-term goals of what happens in each novel, and I have my long-term goals for kind of the larger character arcs and things that would develop in the world over time. And so I got 4 books into it, and they're like, that's nice. What else you got, kid? There's a law of diminishing returns. Your sales start to wane down, and they're like, well, do you have another thing you want to be doing? And we've seen that happen with Kelly McCullough's books and with Christine Henry, who's killing it with her Peter Pan series and Lost Boy and all this other stuff she's doing, and her Alice books, because she started as a paranormal urban fantasy writer. I wrap things up book to book, so there's a certain satisfaction, but I left a little bit of a cliffhanger in book 4, hoping there'd be a book 5. Certain people have changed at the end of the series, and you're like, oh, what's that? How's that going to affect the world moving forward? Which is why people keep asking me, when are we seeing book 5? And the answer really was like, well, they asked me to write a different series. And so I switched and I did 3 books in that series. And then I had twins right around the time that contract was up. So I was like, well, I'm writing some stuff, but it's not contractually obliged to anyone. So at that point, I'm like, I got to keep writing, but I also just keep 2 humans alive at the same time. Apparently that's important or something. So I wasn't beholden to anyone to turn things in. And people will ask about that stuff. And again, it's real easy not to write, especially when you have 2 humans totally dependent on you. So the Simon books wrapped up. I would do a fifth one. I think probably next year at some point. I don't want to write it. Like, here's the thing. You get a lot of people, you get a small group of cheerleaders asking you when the next one's coming. Now, for Jim Butcher, he's a #1 New York Times bestseller out of the gate every time. I'm what I would call mid-list to lower mid-list urban fantasy author. Like, I have a following, but how robust is that? Because you have a very close group of people who are super excited about the characters, whispering in my ear, we want another one, we want another one. I can't put a year to a year and a half to 2 years into something if it's not going to pay me at all. So the answer at this point is going to have to be either a small press decides they want to pick up the Simon Canderous series and pays me up front, or I find out if these voices are voices in my head more so than a small group of cheerleaders, and we do the Kickstarter for it, and we find out if people actually do want it. In which case, I have the notes for it, I have the plans for that, where the book was going, but other projects took precedence because they were the paying gigs, as it were. And honestly, once I went to the Gargoyle series, that just became a fun modern day dungeon crawl series for me to write. There's like a paladin character, a magic user.
Would you have the Simon book and end in an actuality, or would you want to keep that open ended to see if that were to continue if you actually get a contract for it?
I mean, I would like. Here's the thing: I love the characters enough. First of all, they're my first children. Like you always remember your first, as it were. And that series is beloved to me. They're like the first characters I really fell in love with to write in an ongoing series. And 4 books into it, you know them better than you ever knew them, and you love them a lot more. So of course you want to take them as long a run as you could. I think there's a lot more tales to be told in the world of the series. That said, I also know when a thing has gone on too long. I hate watching a series die. I don't need that last season of Dexter, for instance, on Showtime. Like, Dexter was amazing for 3 or 4 seasons. And then they were just like, well, we got to keep it on, so we're going to write a new thing. And they just went off the rails and jumped the shark with it. I'm like, I would like to think I'm smart enough to end a thing before I get there. That said, I think there's a lot more runway to the series, but for that series, it's been 4 years now. And and here's the thing: I've given myself, every time someone asks for an anthology, there's a good chance that sometime it ties into the Simon verse. So
right.
I will do short stories, which kind of scratches my itch to write more Simon stuff. And it's not a full length thing. It's a small commitment time, and it validates and legitimizes in my brain I'm still doing Simon things, but not really, because they're just little things. So I think the Kickstarter or some form of crowdsourcing next year will prove out if people love Simon enough to keep him alive. We'll have bumper stickers, kind of like the Frodo Lives bumper stickers, like the Simon Lives bumper stickers.
So we have a comment from Melanie Metters that says, haha, small press paying up front, ?
Yeah, well, you know,
I guess she's connected into the actual industry to know, that side of publishing.
She's done some editorial work for Ragnarok, and so I've been in a couple of anthologies, one of which is hers called Hell Hath No Fury, in which I did a side story to my Spellmason Chronicles in that. About giving a modern day paladin a birthday present of going to kill a monster, which I had a lot of fun with. But she has long known the angst of small press work at times out there.
Nice.
And, well, here's the thing, and I've seen this in gaming a lot more. My favorite game to play at Gencon in the exhibitor hall was always, who's not going to be here next year? Because especially post open gaming license, when if you slap the D20 logo on it and put the paragraph about all the legal stuff, you could put your name on a product and produce it in the D&D world. And it was amazing. I think it was an amazing thing, the open gaming license, because it allows so many small presses to put stuff out there, and you lived or you died by what you put out. And like, Green Ronin got to grow really big from that. Monty Cook, certainly, who core designed third edition and had a hand in the open gaming license, his company just took off Beyond the Beyond from it. And Pathfinder, we have the glory of Pathfinder thanks to that open gaming license stuff. So much good came from it. But it also meant there was just a big mountain of crap happening at the same time. And I totally lost my thread of why I circled around to this. But you see it in small, in gaming and in small publishing, you have people who are super enthusiastic about gaming. They might know the core rule sets to the bone. They might have, this worked great in my adventure. I want to write this and make this a rule set for someone else. Well, truth is, a lot of people don't care about your world. That's your thing. That was your game. Don't tell me about your character. Stuff like that. We have T-shirts that say that. It's so cliche. But I get the great place of like, I love this hobby so much. I want to be part of the business. Well, enthusiasm and business do not always mix. And so you always see it both in small press and in gaming, a lot of different quality issues over time out there. And, I'm happy we have it because it means there's a lot of opportunity available for gamers and small press for books to happen and game products to happen. And once you sift through that mountain of crap, stuff is going to rise and the rest is going to hopefully just fade away, as it were. And I think it was only a great boon to the industry that they went ahead with open gaming license, because third edition was not necessarily going to be the big welcome back to D&D. Like, how long had it been since second edition rules and since I was playing old rule sets and figuring out THAC0? I mean, like, to hit Armor Class 0, I was like, if I have to read that chart ever again in my life, I was like, really? I'm like, oh. So
I always share this anytime somebody brings up THAC0, but it's like, I for a long time just assumed that THAC0 was just a term, and it didn't actually mean something because it didn't have all the little dots. So I found out many years after I was gaming that THAC0 meant 2-hit AC 0. And the one friend that pointed out, I'm like, I had this like huge, look on my face, and it's like, it finally means something. And they're like, dude, really? Like, I was laughed at for a long time for that one. We're getting down to our last few minutes. So if there's anything that you want to, point out, pitch, whatever you want to do, now's your time.
I will say, first of all, I won't pitch my books. You've heard enough about that, and the links are in the thing there. But I will say, like, if you love gaming and haven't been to Gencon, I would recommend it highly to a lot of people. I'd wanted to go since I was like 8, but apparently as an 8-year-old in 78, you can't just get in a car and go to Wisconsin from rural Massachusetts to go hang out with 40-year-old men. Apparently that's frowned upon. But when my friends and I were like in our 30s and there was an internet suddenly, I'm like, oh crap, that gaming convention's still going on. And we've gone every year since, and they just had their 50th anniversary. More importantly, for anyone who's interested in the writing side, in both the gaming world and really anything related to fantasy or science fiction, I've been part of the Writer Symposium for the past 20 years or so now. It's where I sold my first short story, which then got me in front of an editor, which then sold my first series. And the Writer Symposium has grown leaps and bounds every year. A lot of the guys who design Dungeons and Dragons do a lot of panels for it as well. And you can also see panels on every game or designer you could ever imagine, whatever your poison is in the gaming world out there.
All right, so Anton says, go to Gencon. I will, on the other hand, I will absolutely pimp your stuff. His website is down in the description below. His podcast is down in the description below, as well as an Amazon link if you want to go grab his stuff and check it out. I know that I'm going to be in the very near future. I'm going to have to check out these books. You guys out there listening to Nerdarchy normally, on a regular basis, you know how much I love the Dresden Files. So having something that, sounds similar, I am eager to check it out, sir. So thank you very much for coming on and chatting with me today. I hope you had a lot of fun.
I guess.
I guess. Oh, man. Ow.
No. No, please invite me back later at a later time. I would love to come back and just chat. I could go on and on about games and stuff. So
Absolutely. Next time we'll have to get into, you know, the gaming angle of stuff. So absolutely. So guys out there, until next time, stay nerdy.